We are live and uncut. How's everybody doing on this beautiful Sunday? At least it's a beautiful here in Boston. We're going to wait for a few folks to show up here. We are on the eve of the U.S. Open, the final Grand Slam of the year. I'm happy. I'm in a happy place. 2 weeks of tennis, good, wholesome tennis goodness. Well, maybe it's not so wholesome. I want to talk a little bit about that. I thought you probably saw the cover photo. I had a viewer who sent me a very interesting article that you guys might know about, but article that argues, citing to evidence, I'll talk about it in a few minutes, that there has been draw fixing at the Grand Slams. Now, the study was done, I think it was 2008 to 2011, but it's indicative. If they were fixing them then, they may be fixing them now. And this draw, in fact, of the 2018 U.S. Open comports with the thesis of this professor who now works at the Hope University in Liverpool. She's a sports law professor. Pretty cool. Yeah, well, let's talk about that, Ollie. We'll figure it out here in a second. But I want to thank Stefano Disparati for sending me that information. And again, I want to talk about that article. But I also want to preview, by the way, to save you the suspense, it's not as... Hi, Patrick. Great to see you, my friend. Even though there is evidence that fixing has occurred, it's not the most heinous of a result in terms of the objective they've been trying to achieve through a bit of fixing. Basically, the objection, the thesis, I'll save you the suspense. The thesis is that they're kind of prioritizing the big four and distributing them throughout the draw in these years that the study looks at, from 2008 to 2011. The tournaments, the Grand Slam tournaments, the author argues, have been kind of distributing the big four a little unfairly, or in a way that doesn't comport with what we think about as random draw. Well, random draw selection, I'll talk about that in a second. But we've got some good matches tomorrow, don't we? Want to talk about those as well. A lot of good matches coming right up. We're going to be doing live uncut commentary. If you're just tuning in, subscribe to the channel to get the essential live, uncut, uncensored commentary. Well, we don't do too much that requires censoring anyway here at Tennis Talk Daily, but live, uncut, rough, and uncensored total coverage of the U.S. Open. Subscribe. Remember to hit the bell button next to the subscribe button when you do subscribe. But another piece of news that I wanted to talk about was Alexander Zverev, who's taken on Ivan Lendl, the great Ivan Lendl. We had a couple folks on yesterday. We were talking about what some people call the golden age of tennis back in the 80s when I was growing up. I know that dates me for you youngsters, but that's when I cultivated my love of tennis during the 80s. I fell in love with a lot of the players that were active at that point. McEnroe, of course. McEnroe was my favorite player because he was a lefty. Interestingly, I'm a lefty, but I don't play tennis left-handed. I play tennis right-handed. It just always felt better. I also bat right-handed, but I pitch on the baseball mound. I pitch left-handed. I eat with my left hand. I do lots of things with my left hand. We won't get into the dirty details about what I do with my left hand, but What I'm doing with my left hand right now is putting it over here. What I talked about yesterday is how Pablo Carreño Busta, I think I said it the day before too, when he's returning service, he likes to put his left hand on his knee, which is such a funny pose for him to get in a way. He looks kind of relaxed. What I was saying yesterday is that he kind of looks like a baseball umpire. Call a strike, ball 3. Well, yeah, that's a little unique element about Busta's play. But yes, so Lendl is joining Alexander Zverev as a coach. I think Zverev apparently had an option to take on Boris Becker, another tennis great, and another individual that I remember being at my grandparents' house and watching Boris Becker win his first Wimbledon title. I was just a little boy. And of course, that first year that he won, he was from out of left field. No one knew about Boris Becker. But in any case, Zverev has taken on Lendl. We have a couple of interesting articles that I was checking out with respect to the possible results of this partnership, as it were. Got a bunch of comments from Alexander Zverev himself. Quote, "I like Boris. I love Boris a lot." Oh, he loves Boris a lot. I actually love Boris Becker too. I love Boris Becker's commentary. He's one of the commentators that I really enjoy listening to. Jim Courier is one of these guys who's very smooth. He's a very smooth commentator, but a little too smooth sometimes for my taste. He likes to fill up the air with a lot of talk. Patrick Nielsen saying, "I thought Lendl would coach Andy Murray," and Lendl said that Murray will be the only player he will coach. Well, I'm sorry. That's news to me. I've got recent news that Alexander Zverev has chosen Lendl. Now, you're saying Lendl rejected Zverev? I somehow doubt that. I'm interested in that revelation, but as far as I know, Alexander Zverev, at least he's chosen Ivan Lendl. I guess whether Lendl is going to go with Zverev is another question. I imagine he will, or there wouldn't be this news. But Zverev said he loves Boris. He's a great guy. I've texted and talked to him before announcing the thing with Ivan. I said, look, we have loved to work with you. I would have loved to work with you, and maybe in the future it will hopefully work out. But right now, I just thought that Ivan would be better. Basically, it looks like time commitment-wise. Time commitment-wise, I think that Lendl was a better choice for Zverev, apparently. So what's the result? What will it do? Was another article I was reading on Baseline. And the author of this article, Brandon Carter, dated August 25th, 2018, again on Baseline, the tennis section of Baseline. And he says there are five signs that will tell us if this Zverev-Lendl partnership is a good fit. So I guess he's already determining the standards by which we're going to judge Ivan Lendl in terms of coaching Alexander Zverev. He says Zverev needs to inject more aggression into his forehand. Of course, Zverev's backhand is, as he's calling it, world class. It's known as one of the best backhands on the tour. He has a devastating two-hander. He's not my favorite player with a two-hander. I've said this a couple of times over the last couple of days. David Goffin is my favorite player with a two-hander. He says Zverev needs to have more aggression on his forehand. So, get a little balance in his ground strokes. And tune up that forehand. Sure, why not? Getting more efficient. Quarterfinals of this year's French Open is Zverev's best slam finish, but he won't want to repeat how he got there. He escaped 3 consecutive 5-set matches in which he was at least a set down before his hamstring cried uncle in the quarters. Yes, he needs to get more efficient, needs to keep his emotions in check, and he needs to beat the top 10 players in the best of 5 context. Sure. And of course, winning his first slam. So those will be the measures, according to this baseline writer, those will be the measures by which we will determine whether this Lendl-Zverev partnership is a good one. I think it could be a good one. Remember, I mean, there is a little bit of a mismatch there with the single-hander. Lendl had a very nice single-hander on the backhand side. But in other respects, I think they can have a symbiotic relationship. Certainly, Zverev has a bit of a different style of play than Lendl did. Of course, Lendl's not there to impose his own style of play on any player. That's just silly. He's not going to do that. If he's smart, I think the measure of a good coach is to take stock of the talents. It's like any teaching, to be honest. Take stock of the innate talents, take stock of the strengths, and let them come into bloom. Well, you do have to also work on the weaknesses. That's without question true. Yalya said Zverev needs to work on his movement too. Well, part of the problem with movement and Zverev is that he's a big guy. He's a real big guy. What is he, 6'5" or is he 6'6"? I was watching Medvedev. Apparently it's Medvedev, not Medvedev. Or at least I have a viewer that said that. I haven't gone and checked to see how Medvedev is pronouncing his name. You guys are about 80 to 90% in terms of being correct when you advise me about name pronunciations. A few times you've let me down. It's Medvedev even in Russian. So I was doing that kind of Slavic Medvedev. I thought that would have been the correct way to do it. But you're saying it's just Medvedev, sure. But one of the impressive things about Daniil Medvedev that was on display at Winston-Salem, which for those of you who don't know, Medvedev took his second career title at Winston-Salem, sending the very effective and very consistent Steve Johnson, who's doing a lot of slicing I was talking about. He hits a double-hander, but he's doing a lot of slicing. Medvedev took care of Johnson. Again, Johnson was playing at a very high level, without question. He sent Busta home with no real issue, no real incident with Busta. And Busta, sticks that left hand on his knee, and it's a great return of server. And he was competition. Steve Johnson is someone to keep our eye on. But Medvedev is a big guy, but he moves pretty well. And he was approaching a lot. He had a lot of forward momentum, as I was saying yesterday in that match against Johnson in the final. Again, he won his second career title. But I think this partnership with Zverev and Lendl is a good one, without question. So Felipe Augusto de Souza, welcome, my friend. What is your bet for Tsitsipas in the U.S. Open? It's a good question. He's certainly someone we're following. After that run at the Rogers Cup, I think he's capable of doing anything. Remember, it included 4 wins over top 10 players in the course of that Rogers Cup, including Novak Djokovic. Well, his draw in the U.S. Open, he's down in the second half of the top half, or the second quarter of the draw. He's going to be facing, interestingly enough, Medvedev, probably. Tsitsipas will be facing a qualifier. I actually know who that is. It's not on my printout, but I can check the matches for tomorrow because he is playing tomorrow. Let's see here. I just saw him, I thought. Robredo, a Spaniard, he'll be playing. And Medvedev will be playing Evgeny Donskoy. Donskoy, incidentally, has beaten Tsitsipas. Tsitsipas and Medvedev had a little rundown, or a little conflict, I should say, in Miami. That was the story was circulated a bit among tennis people, among fans of tennis. Not a lot of you knew about it, but apparently Tsitsipas actually made a reference to Medvedev's Russian nationality, and it was a little ugly for Tsitsipas, but he'll face Medvedev probably in the second round. He's capable of dealing with Medvedev, but Medvedev did beat him in Miami. I don't think they've faced each other since. Let me know if I'm wrong about that. I don't think so. In the third round, he might be looking at a Borna Coric match, which could be very, very competitive. I think Tsitsipas has beaten Coric. I think Coric has beaten Tsitsipas as well. So then he's going to have to deal with Del Potro. I mean, if I'm being, I think, conservative with respect to Tsitsipas, I think that he'll probably get ousted by Juan Martin in the fourth round. So we're looking probably at a fourth round run. But listen, this is tennis. This is one of the reasons why I love watching tennis. Anything can happen. Anything can happen, folks. Patrick says Federer is hopefully not going to have a bad day at the office like in Cincinnati. Well, that's a good point. And one of the things I was saying yesterday, I had a commenter come on and say, "Oh, Aaron," of course, they didn't bother to watch much of the live stream from yesterday. They just assumed that I must have been talking for almost 3 hours about Rafael Nadal, and they must have assumed that I was expressing some kind of bias against Rafael Nadal based on their previous experience with me. But Nadal, I think, he's obviously a favorite in this tournament. I've been actually quite nice to Nadal over these last couple of weeks. I've said before, I warmed up to Rafa. But the point about that is Patrick says, Patrick says that there is the possibility that Federer has bad days at the office. But you know what? And this is to Rafa's credit, folks. It's amazing. It's amazing. Rafa doesn't really have bad days at the office. A bad day at the office is not an excuse. It's not a good excuse. I think that's basically what Federer had to conclude that it was, but it's not a good excuse. And Rafa never makes that excuse, really, because he doesn't have bad days. He's either injured or he loses fair and square. I mean, for example, in Wimbledon in 2017 against Jill Muller. I mean, that was a competitive match, He didn't manage to lift himself out of that slump, Nadal I'm talking about, at Wimbledon. But one of the reasons I've warmed up so much to Nadal is because of his Wimbledon performance and the extent to which he adapted his play this year on the grass. That really impressed me. That inspired me. And I was so happy to see him. And to be quite honest, folks, I was secretly rooting for Nadal in the match against Djokovic because I just thought Nadal had done such a good job. And I thought that he really did tailor his play a bit. He was evidencing some very impressive point construction. As I was saying before, a lot of forward momentum in Nadal's play. He was ending points, He was thinking through the points, following them through. A bit Federer-esque, but it paid off. Got a semifinal run. He did fall narrowly to Djokovic, the eventual champion. So that's my prediction with respect to Tsitsipas. Absolutely rationally, I think he's probably not going to make it through the fourth round. But anything could happen. He's capable of dealing with Delpo. Delpo does have bad days at the office. Nadal doesn't have bad days at the office, really. Djokovic does have bad days at the office. But really, I mean, that's kind of the measure of a player. Do you have a bad day at the office? And that's where Rafael Nadal is so singular and commendable and great and tremendous. And I love him. And it's because he's just so consistent. So consistent. Not emotional at all, keeps his emotions at bay. I want to talk about the emotional component too. I got some interesting comments from folks because I've been taking the position that we don't want Roger emotional. There's been some regression, literally regression over the course of the past few months with Roger. And Listen, I love Matt over at Coffee Break Tennis, but there's only so far I will go with respect to kind of legitimating Roger's conduct in this regard. Matt has said on occasion that he thinks the grumpy old goat is a good thing to have, that means Roger is serious. And I even echoed that a bit a couple months ago. But I've changed my views on that because the more I learn about Roger's personal evolution, the more I am thoroughly convinced that emotional control is a central part of his game. And remember, he ushered in a new era in tennis in a way that the era of emotional control, the era of manners too. Now, Roger Federer used to be a brat. And I think it was you, Patrick. I mean, he falls off the wagon. I said yesterday that Federer doesn't smash rackets. I was talking about Djokovic smashing his racket in the match against Raonic in Cincinnati. And I said, well, Federer's not smashing rackets. Nadal's not smashing rackets. And one of my viewers said, well, Federer smashed his racket in Miami in 2009. I think that was you, Patrick. I loved that response because, he does. He falls off the wagon. I'm sure that's true. I haven't gone back to verify that, but I guess it does happen. But generally speaking, for the Fed fans, emotional control, evenness, a serene, stolid, committed approach is much better than this malarkey he's been pulling, arguing with the umpires and getting upset. And the more he gets upset, the worse he plays sometimes. Now, there's been some exceptions to that, but like I said yesterday, and he was grumpy at Indian Wells, and I queried to the audience. I said, did being grumpy at Indian Wells help Federer? No, it didn't. It hurt him. He was all grumpy, all that stubble, and he was just in a foul mood. He needs to get in a better mood and just relax. And that's what I was saying the other day. Fed fans need to relax. Just as Fed fans need to relax, Roger needs to relax. And just as Roger needs to relax, Fed fans need to relax. Some of you have argued that I don't have enough faith in Federer because I have definitively stated that he is not a favorite at this point to win the U.S. Open. A lot of you think I'm being too hard on Federer. I have faith in Federer. I have faith that he will make it to the quarterfinals. I have faith that he will have deep runs in many tournaments. I have faith that he's going to be displaying his tennis brilliance for many years to come, hopefully, for a few years to come. I got a good comment the other day from a viewer saying, Roger should retire and then come back in a couple of years, fresh, kind of retire, take a year or two off, and come back refreshed. And it's kind of an interesting idea, as many of you know. I mean, there's been a few players who've done that. Bjorn Borg, who we were talking about yesterday, was someone who tried to come back, and that didn't work out well at all for Bjorn Borg. Now, Borg retired incredibly early. The first time he retired incredibly early. I think he was like 26 or 25 years old. Of course, he had racked up all sorts of records, won all sorts of Grand Slams. I mean, he had done a lot. He had done much more before the age of 27 than the players are these days. Even some of the best players now. We do have the big three, the big four. Of course, they were thriving, but it's taking longer and longer for the players to learn how to play great tennis. Essentially, such that now, someone like Isner now Isner's always been a force of nature. Isner's always been someone that you can't take for granted, but he kind of came out of his shell a bit and has started to develop and started to make a breakthrough with that win. I think that was his first Masters 1000 win in Miami. So, there he's coming out of the woodwork. Kevin Anderson coming out of the woodwork in a way. Again, he's always been around, kind of been lingering, posting some fairly good results. But before you know it, it's a little bit of a surprise to see him in the U.S. Open final last year. And so it's taking a lot longer for these players to figure it all out. Whether there's something sinister going on in the background, we can talk about a bit. But tomorrow's matches, let's talk about that a little bit. Well, Kevin Anderson will be playing Ryan Harrison tomorrow. I have a couple of good matchups tomorrow. Querrey versus Seppi. Of course, Querrey fell to Taro Daniel at the Winston-Salem Open last week. Misha Zverev will be playing Taylor Fritz. Could be a good match. Misha Zverev is fun to watch, but you know what? I've said this before. Misha Zverev, you have to kind of have a pretty solid constitution to watch Misha Zverev. It's not for the faint of heart to watch Misha Zverev. I mean, really, literally, his game is it's all balls. It's just pure cojones, and it's a numbers game with him. He started to modify his game because in a way he was so robotic for a while. It's just approach, it's just come to the net at every possible opportunity, certainly behind virtually every serve. I think he needs to start mixing it up. He plays well from the baseline. I think Misha Zverev should mix it up because too often, and he did get his first career title on grass this year, and it was an amazing match to watch against Lucas Lachko, and it was the Antalya Open, as I recall, but it was a very interesting match, and Zverev is a lot of fun to watch. Misha Zverev, I'm saying, folks, is a lot of fun to watch when he's playing well, but I do think he can mix it up a little bit rather than so kind of mechanically. He's very predictable, incredibly predictable, too predictable. That's his problem. Andy Murray will be facing Duckworth, the Australian. And then, of course, I think probably the best match of the day, or potentially the best match of the day, though I'm sad that the match pits two fantastic one-handers against each other. And that will be the Stanimal, Wawrinka versus Dimitrov. That's in the opening round. Well, heck, if that's in the first round, man, this is going to be a fantastic tournament. Ramos Vinolas will be playing Karen Khachanov, who was disappointed or had a disappointing result at Winston-Salem. Khachanov, that is. Jack Sock is playing Andriozzi. Of course, we don't have much hope for Jack Sock. Let's talk about this potential draw fixing at the U.S. Open. For those of you coming on, remember to subscribe to get the live stream. We're going to be doing live uncut commentary of the U.S. Open this week and next, dissecting every possible issue, trying with every opportunity to determine just what kind of form Federer is going to bring to this tournament. Now, I think Federer will be playing on Tuesday. Watching Djokovic, will Djokovic follow through on these recent wins? Can he win his second Grand Slam of the year? Can Djokovic do it? Well, Tennis Rules says Djokovic's first 4 rounds as easy as it gets. I would tend to agree with you, Tennis Rules. I would tend to agree with you. He's going to play the Hungarian Marton Fucsovics in the opening round. May have to deal with Tennis Sandgren possibly in the second round. No big worries. Possibly Gasquet at worst in the third round. And then either Pui or maybe Carreño Busta, who fell pretty hard to Steve Johnson at Winston-Salem. Yeah, I agree. I mean, right into that quarterfinal, it's just about as clean as you can have it for Djokovic. But let's talk about this. It's a really interesting article. Now, the article concludes, and the individual's name, let's see, where'd my index card here go? The individual's name, she's a professor now at the Hope University in Liverpool. And her name is Katerina Pejetlovic. She is a sports law professor. And she has written a number of articles, but the one that was brought to my attention by Stefano Disperati, thank you, Stefano, was an article called Facts and Statistics Indicate Fixing at the Very Top of Men's Tennis. Basically, the argument is that there has been a tendency to fix these draws to bring out matches between these big 4 members at the right times rather than according to the random sample and the components of a draw that are random. Not all components are random. Some of it has to do with rankings, of course. But there are 128 players in the Grand Slam, 32 seeded players and 96 unseeded players. The first seed is placed on line 1. Second seed is placed on the bottom line. This ensures that the 2 best players cannot meet before the finals. Sure. Thereafter, 3rd and 4th seeded players are hand-drawn from the cup. The first drawn is placed at line 33 in the middle of the top half of the draw, and the second is placed at line 96 in the draw sheet, which is the middle of the bottom half. Okay, so that's 1, 2, 3, and 4. And so 3 and 4, even though 1 and 2 are, 1's always going to be at the top, 2's always going to be at the bottom. 3 and 4 are random. They can be at the top or the bottom. What she does here, and she's looking at, I think, at the period from 2008 to 2011. And her conclusion is, supposed to be done, is just too low. So the argument is this, basically. Djokovic and Federer are nearly always placed in the same half of the draw. And Nadal and Murray are always placed in the same half of the draw, the opposite side. So going through them all, at the Australian Open, Djokovic, at the Australian Open in 2011, Djokovic in Federer's half. French Open 2011, Djokovic and Federer's half, Murray's and Nadal's half. It just goes on and on and on. Every one of the tournaments from 2008 to 2011, there's a couple of exceptions, have this configuration with Federer and Djokovic in the same half and Murray and Nadal. And the reason why it's strange is because, for one, sometimes Murray hasn't even been the number 4 player in terms of the number 4 seed. So, and yet he's still always ending up in Nadal's half. Federer has been forced, essentially, to face Djokovic many, many more times. And that's reflected, well, in the Grand Slams. Obviously, Djokovic wasn't around for a little while, till about 2008, to be honest. So this is kind of a good period to look at, 2008 to 2011. So the conclusion is that there is just no way this could have been done properly. There's just no way this could have been done properly. Someone fine-tuned this. And maybe this is not contrary to what you already understood. I mean, listen, I would have probably, if you'd asked me a couple days ago before I read this article, if you asked me whether the draws are getting fixed to some degree, are getting fine-tuned, I would have said yes. So it's not really that surprising of a result, to be honest. Her conclusion, I quote, the probability that the two incredible coincidences might happen simultaneously in all these tournaments is 1 in 32 billion or something. That's a little out of context, but basically it's just virtually impossible to come up with these draws if the organizers were following the rules on the draws. So the result, however, is that Federer has had to face, and this U.S. Open comports with this, right? Federer and Djokovic in the same quarter, but certainly in the same half. Of course, Murray's up there with Nadal in the top half of the draw. So let me know what you think about that. I mean, it's not that big of a deal in terms of the result. They're not manipulating it in real sinister ways to try to produce a result. I think what they're trying to do is please the audience in a way. They're trying to create entertaining matches. And because the big four are, obviously very popular names and some of the best players of all time, there's that, of course, that phrase, the big four, that has been circulating in tennis for so long. And I think people are really interested in those matches. So I think the tournaments essentially want to squeeze the big four and matchups between the big four members as much as they possibly can. Now, whether that's sinister and wrong, I'm not sure. The author notes also some recent research conducted by ESPN's Outside the Lines. And you know what? I'm not sure when this article was published. When this article was published, she was working at a different university or was doing her degree in Estonia. But now she's in Liverpool at Hope University, which is in England. Maybe this came out around 2012, 2013, perhaps more recently. Recent research conducted by ESPN's Outside the Lines demonstrated that the computer-generated part of the draw at the U.S. Open, which is supposed to randomly distribute the unseeded players in the draw, has likely been rigged for the past 10 years. To ensure that the top two players face the easiest possible opponents in the first round. Quote, and this is an official, Chris Weidmeyer of U.S. Tennis Association. It's still possible, though, in sport, just like in life, that anomalies can happen, he says. But the statistical analysis conducted by Dr. Andrew Swift produced as easy opponents in the first round in only 4 out of a million simulations. 4 out of a million simulations. So again, giving the top two seeds easy opponents in the first round is something that's calculated, is something that's fine-tuned after the fact. What they do is they put these draws together based on the seeds. They randomly distribute the non-seeded players, and then they look at what that's produced, and then they start to tweak it a little bit. And again, I don't think this is too incredibly sinister, what they're doing. There's a financial interest, to get right to the heart of the matter. There's a financial interest in ensuring that the top two players get through at least the first round, isn't there? So probably it's dollars and cents that are at play here, folks. By itself, the U.S. Open numbers are weird, Dr. Swift said. And when they're also weird in comparison to the other three Grand Slams, and they're also weird in comparison to the other three Grand Slams. So you've got a double argument of weirdness here. It's interesting for a doctor. It's interesting phraseology. Double argument of weirdness. It's not something I ever said before. Something weird is going on. Okay, he likes the adjective weird, which, if he's a doctor, he should be able to come up with something better. Maybe odd, maybe unseemly. Weird's fine. It is a little weird. There does seem to be some fixing. So that's just reality check. Reality check, folks. There's a little bit of fine tuning. There's some tweaking going on. There's some tweaking going on. To repeat, 128 players, 32 seeded players, 96 unseeded players. First seed is on line one, second seed's at the bottom. Then they randomly distribute the third and fourth seeds to the top of the bottom. And then there's a process, a procedure for distributing the other seeded players. And then, of course, there's a randomness associated with the there's a little more randomness associated with the unseeded players. Well, the conclusion: in 12 out of 12 Grand Slam tournaments played on hard and grass courts between 2008 and 2011, Federer and Djokovic were always drawn in the same half of the draw, while Nadal and Murray were drawn to the other half. And there's just no way under the current procedure that that could have happened properly. So some fixing was happening. They're fixing the draws mildly. They're tweaking the draws to make sure to maximize the appeal, to maximize the matches that are played between the big four players. And then according to the ESPN research, of course, they're trying also to ensure that the top players survive the early rounds. They're giving the number 1 and 2 seeds particularly easy players in the first round. Well, let's look at that. Rafael Nadal's got to deal with David Ferrer, who at this point is a pretty easy player. He used to be quite a good player, to be honest. He's just kind of way past his prime. But if you have any views on David Ferrer, let me know. Yes, exactly. They want to maximize the money. And who can blame them? Who can blame them? But, you know, it's interesting. You get to see this stuff. I mean, being the number 1 and 2 player, you know, comes with certain privileges, apparently. One of the privileges is that you get an easy match in the first round at the U.S. Open. Whereas, like Stan Wawrinka, he's got to play Grigor Dimitrov in the first round, you know. Djokovic, Wawrinka, Murray, they've been having to deal with some very difficult first-round matches precisely because they don't hold very impressive, or they didn't at the time hold impressive rankings. Of course, Djokovic is climbing up the charts, folks, climbing up the charts. And some people believe that Djokovic will lift his 14th at the U.S. Open. Will it happen? Well, Djokovic will have to get through Roger Federer. And the question of how Federer will be playing, how will Federer deal with the problem, the little problem of Djokovic? Well, I had a viewer the other day say that Federer is scared of Djokovic. He doesn't want to face them. And I said, I disagree. He wants Djokovic. He wants a piece of Djokovic. He is glad. He's not surprised. Let's put it that way. He's certainly not surprised to get Djokovic, given that research we just looked at. He's not surprised to have Djokovic in his half of the draw, and probably not too surprised to have him in his quarter of the draw at all, because that's the way it's always happened. Nadal shouldn't be too surprised to see Andy Murray in his half of the draw, because that's the way it always happens. So that's the research by Katerina Pjetlovic, and thank you again to Stefano Disparati for alerting me to that interesting article. Again, the upshot for those of you tuning in is that there is some mild fixing occurring almost certainly at the Grand Slams. They want to maximize the punch of the big four. Essentially, they want to maximize the extent to which matches between big four members happen. They want to ensure that the big four get through and play as many matches as possible. That's kind of what the upshot of this research is, which actually combines not only the Pjetlovic research, but also the ESPN research. So that is kind of the end result. Is it offensive? Should there be some kind of change made? I'm not sure. I'm not offended by it because, listen, it's good for the sport to have there be some profit involved by, on the part of these tournaments. I mean, these tournaments have to make money. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I'll turn on a tennis match, even at really big tournaments, 500 level, 1,000 level, certainly at Cincinnati, even in the Rogers Cup, and it's just the attendance level in the stadiums, in the stands is just very, very weak. They need to make money. Otherwise, we can't have these events. Michael Walker says he made excuses when Nadal beat him at 17. He made excuses when Murray was beating him as a teenager and wasn't gracious in defeat. Are you talking about Roger Federer? Well, I think you are if you're talking about being beaten right by Rafael Nadal when Nadal was 17. Was he making excuses? I mean, listen, they all make excuses ultimately. Listen, Federer at the end of the day, when he lies down at night, goes to sleep, has to kind of face himself, he doesn't make excuses. This game, ultimately, no matter what you say in a press conference, maybe he'll come out. Listen, you can say that Federer is making excuses, but in reality, the press kind of asks questions that require an excuse. What happened today, Roger? What are you thinking? How can you explain it? Well, he's got to come up with something. I mean, so maybe during the course of a press conference, he makes excuse-like statements. But at the end of the day, when he gets into bed with Mirka, and maybe even the kids are jumping in. Well, if the kids are jumping into bed with him, then he's probably not having to deal with this kind of very deep thought and deep reflective kind of cogitation on his part. No, I know that feeling being a dad. You can't really get any meditation time if your kids are jumping in the bed, and my kids are always jumping in my bed. So I got the wife in the bed, the kids in the bed. We have a king-size bed, but there's only so many people that can fit in a king-size bed. But assuming that it's just he and Mirka, or heck, he might even sleep alone. I don't know. Married couples are weird, one of them starts to snore or something and they'll just separate. They love each other. Maybe they'll just separate, sleep in separate rooms. Certainly they can afford to have separate rooms. They don't seem like the type of couple that sleep apart, but you'd be surprised. I've had many friends, they get married a couple months later. It's like, yeah, he snores too much. We've separated. We're in different rooms, but they're still happily married, But in any case, at the end of the day, Federer faces it and Federer takes accountability. It's one of the beautiful aspects of tennis, which is that there's accountability, individual responsibility. There's no one to blame but yourself for a loss of a tennis match. There's no one to blame but yourself. Roger knows that. There's no excuses. What Roger said at the end of the Cincinnati match is that his footwork didn't appear to be sort of functional, didn't appear to be sort of firing on all cylinders. A legitimate comment. I mean, that does, I mean, kind of, you can't trace it. That's not a good excuse. It's not a legitimate excuse. I am done to the extent that I tried to do it before. I am done trying to legitimate Roger Federer's unusual play and unusual conduct and just lackluster performances. I am done trying to legitimate that. Well, not legitimate it, but I'm certainly done. I'm to the extent I've tried to make excuses before, and I don't think I have. What I said the other day was true. He had a bad day at the office. But then what I also said, for you guys that are the Nadal fans, by the way, thank you for your note, Culture and Sport, about the Italian tennis commentator. I might say something about him in a little bit. I appreciate that because I'd like to check him out. I love other tennis commentators too, and I like to learn from them, particularly the good ones. I was saying before that Jim Courier is one that I think is he's a good commentator. He's a smart guy, to be honest. Not all the tennis players are super smart, folks, because not a lot of them attended school, to be honest. They didn't go very far in school. I mean, Roger Federer doesn't have a college degree. None of them do. I mean, if anything, they go back afterwards. And not to say a college degree, is required before you can be a smart person. I'm just saying they're not. Most of them are not formally educated. Well, Jim Courier, I don't know what he did. Maybe Jim Courier is someone who decided to go back and do some more education after his tennis career. I'm not sure. But he speaks. He's very articulate. Jim Courier. He is great in interviews. I'm getting a comment about that. He does interviews wonderfully. And that is a skill set that's different from sitting there and commentating on a match. And he does that well as too. My critique of Courier, to be quite honest, is that he talks too much. He really does fill up in tennis commentating. And when I talk about tennis commentating, the live tennis commentary, the hired guns that are coming in and commenting on the match. There's a tradition of deference to the game and to the play. And I think the best commentators during the match err on the side of shutting up. And I think Courier too often does not err on the side of shutting up. Now, but the thing is about Courier is that often he's filling up the air with some really brilliant stuff, to be honest. He always has great stuff to say. I love Jim Courier, don't get me wrong. Federer is a doctor. Liam, nice point. An honorary doctor. Dr. Roger. Yes, and he deserves it too. Listen, I was just saying it's the reality that these players don't usually get a chance to go to school in terms of post-secondary education, college, graduate degrees. I'm sure there are some players that do it after their careers. They go back to school retire in their 30s and they can go back to school. But it's just the reality that the tennis takes up way too much of their time. There's no free time to be sitting in class learning biology or reading Tolstoy. No, there's too much to do. And of course, Roger Federer is a genius, and he's brilliant in his own way at tennis. I'm not sure whether he's brilliant at other things. I mean, it's really just tennis. And for so many of the players, it's just tennis. That's all they know. They don't have any backup, I don't think. But I may be wrong about that. It strikes me that they should have some backup. It strikes me that reading a lot of books would do them probably pretty good. They love, if they want to stick to tennis, they could read tennis biographies. There's a lot of great literature out there on tennis. But, oh yes, Bud Collins, a legend. Really the greatest tennis commentator. My inspiration, my chief inspiration, Bud Collins. He took a lot of crap, or some crap, because he didn't have a record as a tennis champion. I mean, he played tennis. He probably played about as much tennis as I did, which is, some competitive tennis when I was young, and I've continued to play as an adult, but we don't have any like major titles. Well, Bud Collins, took some heat for that. But you know what? He called himself a tennis historian. And he wrote a very, very good book. I would recommend it to you if you want to read an interesting book on it's very much of a summary. It doesn't get into, excruciating scholarly detail or anything, but it's a good book. It's basically the Bud Collins history of tennis. You can check it out from the library. I've read it a couple of times. But Bud Collins was one of the real greats. I like John McEnroe too. John McEnroe, I think, has become a very good tennis commentator. Listen, going back to the point that a lot of them aren't necessarily, I mean, first of all, it's such an international sport that, not a lot of them, to be quite honest, but they are not people who are gifted necessarily in terms of being speakers and this kind of thing, articulating themselves context of providing tennis commentary. No, they're not. And it's really only a very, very small, tiny minority, just a tiny minority of tennis players are even intellectually capable of going on and being tennis commentators. It's true. Pete Sampras, for example. Could you imagine Pete Sampras providing commentary? No. Pete Sampras, he can play tennis, but I don't think he can talk about tennis, folks. They're two different skill sets. I don't play tennis as well as Pete Sampras. Wow, you could say that again. But I talk about tennis better than Pete Sampras does, probably. And that's not to give me a lot of credit, because I don't think Pete Sampras is he just doesn't have that kind of talent. And I'm not saying I have a talent either necessarily. I'm just saying, actually, I've probably done a lot more public speaking than Pete Sampras ever has. But it's only a small minority who go on and become the commentators. Andy Roddick, Logan, you say Andy Roddick should do commentary. Yeah, he could be. He could be quite good. I find him to be a pretty articulate guy. I mean, the main things I remember from Roddick interviews are the interviews when, he'll be with Federer or whatever. There's a couple interviews. I think Roddick interviewed Federer one time, right? Kind of odd. I don't know. Kind of a staged interview. They probably had to pay Roddick a lot of money, but he said something to the effect of, yeah, I mean, I could have been great were it not for you, Roger. You kept beating me. I think Roddick had just claimed the world #1 spot before Federer just kind of ruined it all for him. But Roddick seems like he might be able to do some commentary. Someone like Rafael Nadal, no way. Would never be able to do tennis commentary. Roger Federer, now that's an interesting question. It's an interesting question. Federer does know how to express himself fairly well. But if I were to reach into my pocket and make a bet on this, I would say he's not going to be doing extended commentary either. No, I am not saying that. I am not criticizing other tennis commentators. I'm saying that there are many tennis players who will not. I'm saying a very small minority of tennis players are even in a good position to go on and do commentary. Because it's just a skill set that you either have or you don't. You can either talk in that way or you can't. And Jim Courier is someone who is really great. Fabrice Santoro, he's another good one. I like him. And he's very he's very respectful. There again, let me go back to that, because my only critique of Courier, again, don't try to you're saying don't critique the tennis commentators. I'm not critiquing I am criticizing Courier for a small thing, but you got to put that in the context of my praise for Courier. I've called him a very bright, very articulate commentator who is masterful in interviews. But if I had to critique him, and I'm permitted to do that, why not? I would say that he sometimes engages in a little logorrhea. Oh, you're really going to get mad at me for that one. And what is logorrhea? It's diarrhea of the mouth. Diarrhea with words, logorrhea. Use that. Next time you come across someone who's talking too much, uh-oh. Did I just subject myself to accusations of logorrhea? Uh-oh. You want to call me someone who does that? Listen. But Courier generally is fantastic. But there is this tradition in tennis commentating of just letting the players play, and erring on the side of silence rather than filling the air up with comments just for the sake of making comments. Sometimes, every now and again, it's not all the time. Usually Jim Courier is fantastic. I would say 85% of the time he's saying stuff that's intelligent, helpful, and absolutely reflective of the fact that he is a Grand Slam multi-Grand Slam champion himself. So he knows the game, and I value his commentary tremendously. And if you're watching Jim, and you could be, thank you for your great commentary. You're an exceptional commentator and you're coming into this as a person from a cohort of people, tennis players generally. You're coming into this with not a very good likelihood of being a good speaker. So Courier's really the exception. But there are some great commentators. I love it. There are a couple of Australian guys, and I can't get all their names straight, but the accents do amuse me sometimes. But so apparently Federer was out on the court practicing with Cilic the other day. That's a good practice match, I think. It's a fantastic practice match. But he does have the Black Beauty out. For those of you who haven't been following this bit of a saga with respect to Federer's racket, he brought out what people were calling the Tuxedo Wilson Pro Staff, which is formerly called the Wilson Pro Staff Autograph. He brought that out for the first time at Stuttgart, played through grass with it, and then played straight through Cincinnati with the Tuxedo. But when he came back to start practicing at the U.S. Open, and incidentally, apparently he's been doing some mishits, kind of the same kind of mishits we were seeing at Cincinnati in practice. But he has now brought out the Black Beauty again, which he used. And whether there's any differences other than the cosmetic differences, whether there's any differences between the Black Beauty Wilson Pro Staff and the Tuxedo Wilson Autograph, I think it's called, I'm not sure. I don't think there's really any difference. Now, they're always tweaking their rackets, but the Black Beauty that he's been using, it's a 97 square inch racket. Of course, as you all know, Roger Federer waited a long time before enlarging his racket head. He's kind of a conservative guy in a way in that respect. Waited a long time before he joined Twitter. And as a result, Rafael Nadal has, I think, over 3 million more followers on Twitter. But he has the new racket, or the Black Beauty, so we'll have to see whether he uses that. But he was out with Cilic. He's practicing, folks. We're going to get some evidence in terms of what his form looks like. He may have to deal with, of course, pursuant to the bit of match fixing that I just sort of demonstrated does take place. Roger will have a fairly easy match in the first round. The Japanese player Yoshito Nishioka presuming Federer can get through Nishioka, it will probably be Benoit Paire in the second round. Paire is no slouch. He was giving Roger a bit of trouble on grass this year, to be quite honest. He has some problems with his emotions, Benoit Paire. But that could be an interesting match, a test. I think the Paire match will be the best indicator of where Roger's game is and where Roger's head is in this U.S. Open. But then, as we've been saying, if Roger gets through the Frenchman, the bearded Frenchman, I love Paire's beard. Well, here in Boston, we have the Red Sox. And, of course, all the Red Sox have beards. It's kind of a team motto and a team theme in any case. But the beards are very popular. I'm going to close these blinds. I'll be right back. But the big match is going to be the potentially very challenging match against Nick Kyrgios. Now, Nick Kyrgios has not had particularly deep runs at the U.S. Open. So a few of you may think that I'm sort of overestimating the threat of Nick Kyrgios. Kyrgios is not very dependable psychologically either. He can have bad days for sure. For those of you just joining us, I was saying before that Rafael Nadal doesn't seem to have bad days. He doesn't have bad days at the office. Djokovic does, and Federer, good God, we know he does. We know he does. It really hasn't. I can't remember the last time Federer's had as bad of a day as he had in Cincinnati. I can't remember. I mean, that was just hellacious. That was hard to watch. Credit to Djokovic. Djokovic applied the pressure, folks. Credit to Novak. Much respect for Novak Djokovic, even though Federer, I don't think, required him to play up to his full level. He didn't require that Djokovic really kind of shift into beast mode. No, he didn't. He didn't require that, so Djokovic didn't do that. Djokovic did some pushing. That was all about depth and push. That's how he gets under Federer's skin. The only question is, does Federer have an answer in the form of point construction? True point construction in the form of dictating play. You must dictate Djokovic. You just over dictate him. You must absolutely slam him. He will retrieve. He will retrieve. That's the problem. And Federer was having such a difficult time putting pretty easy shots away against Djokovic. We've got a comment from Denai. I think Kyrgios has a lot of talent, but hard work beats talent if talent doesn't put the hours in. Yeah, that's right. You need the hard work, and you need a deep love of the game. Isn't Kyrgios the guy who said that tennis isn't even his favorite sport? Didn't he say basketball was his favorite sport? Well, something's wrong then. I'm not sure if I believe him. He's got a big mouth. He's got a really big mouth. And so he says lots of things. I appreciate the viewer that forwarded me the full quote from Kyrgios. When Kyrgios made his comments about Tsitsipas earlier in the week, Kyrgios, as some of you know, said, and I admit I kind of quoted Kyrgios out of context in the cover photo. But Kyrgios did say, one of the quotes was, he's not a good player. Tsitsipas is not a very good player now. in the context of the quote as a whole in the interview, Kyrgios did mean to say that he's not good now, but he's developing. Basically, the upshot of the quote, if I'm going to give the benefit of the doubt to Nick Kyrgios, which I'm not sure I should. Does Kyrgios deserve the benefit of the doubt? I'm not sure Nick Kyrgios deserves the benefit of the doubt, but if I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt, it was a pretty ordinary quote to the extent it basically just said, yeah, Tsitsipas is young. He's still learning. He's going to be better later. He's not good yet. But what I thought was interesting about the quote is that Kyrgios has never played Tsitsipas. We have two young gun players in the recent past, over the past couple of weeks, who have been kind of dissing Stefanos Tsitsipas. There's Alexander Zverev, who after his match, after he was beaten by Tsitsipas in Canada, he kind of belittled Tsitsipas. He kind of like, I was really terrible today. We can't give Tsitsipas too much credit for this win. And it was clear. It was pretty clear from the quotes from Zverev. And then Nick Kyrgios now, a couple weeks later, comes out and says, Tsitsipas is not a very good player yet. He needs to develop, kind of like paternalistically. They're not that much different in age. I think Kyrgios is a whopping like 2 or maybe 3 years older than Tsitsipas. No, I think it's 2, because Tsitsipas was just recently, his birthday is right around Federer's. He just recently turned 20, I think. But, that was a situation where I think Kyrgios should have just buttoned his lip. Just button your lip, buddy. Just refrain. But listen, in the context of the entire quote, all he was saying was Tsitsipas needs to improve. But I even question the propriety of him saying that, because he never played Tsitsipas. Now, I had a clever viewer come on and give a comment the other day. He says, Aaron, you haven't played Tsitsipas either. The suggestion being, Aaron, you shouldn't be able to, you're not in a position, you're not competent to conclude that Tsitsipas is good. I disagree. I am competent to conclude. Why? He beat 4 top 10 players. Okay, let's say Zverev was having a bad day. Talk about excuses. Michael Walker was, I think, suggesting that Roger Federer makes excuses. Well, Alexander Zverev that was pretty much all excuse after that Tsitsipas match. Tsitsipas match, not Tsitsipas match. Oh, these tennis player names are always twisting up my tongue. But listen, Kyrgios has the ability to ruffle the feathers of Roger Federer. There's no question. Take a look at the Laver Cup match. And take a look at all their matches, to be honest. I mean, Federer was able to take care of Kyrgios at Stuttgart on the lawns. Well, Kyrgios has not had deep runs at the U.S. Open, folks, but he is capable of getting under the great Federer's skin. What's my prediction? And the presence of Kyrgios as a potential third-round opponent renders almost by itself, but of course then the Djokovic quarterfinal really kind of tops it off. But those two matches, those two potential matches, Kyrgios in the third round, Djokovic in the quarterfinals, render Roger Federer's path into the semifinals substantially more difficult than the number 1 seeds, Rafael Nadal, and more difficult really than just about anybody's draw. Any of the top players' draws, I mean. Of course, some of those lower-ranked players, they're going to get screwed. That's the price you have to pay. Those are the dues you have to pay. We were talking before, for those of you tuning in, that these draws are fixed, folks. They are fixed in minor ways. They are done according to the rules first, and then a select committee sits down, looks at the results, and tweaks things so as to maximize the potential for big ticket matches and maximize the potential, if I'm saying, most conservatively phrased, to maximize the potential of some of the top players not losing early in the match. And particularly Federer, particularly Nadal. They are the ones that draw the crowds. Djokovic to some degree, but it really is Federer and Nadal drawing the crowds. And I was very impressed and surprised. I didn't know Rafa Nadal had over 3 million more followers on Twitter than Roger Federer. I don't know what the Facebook tally is in terms of Facebook followers for Rafa and Roger. I don't really do a lot of Facebook. Kind of quit Facebook. But Rafa's a draw, and Roger, of course, really one of the most loved athletes in history. And they have the appeal. So I don't think that the extent to which they're match fixing is, and the reasons for which they're doing it, are too objectionable, to be honest. I mean, listen, we want the sport to do well. I was saying before, I am constantly disappointed to look in the bleachers at some of these big tournaments, watching these matches, even on TV. You can see, the attendance is just very poor sometimes. So they're not making money there. There's the tennis media that is making money in some other ways. Of course, Tennis TV sells the memberships. I have one. And there's other ways that money is made on tennis, apart from purchasing tickets actually and attending the matches. Any of you out there actually attending the US Open this year? Let me know. I think Michael Walker, you might be. But I think that it's okay for them to tweak the draws so as to maximize the potential for big matches between, for example, as the research has shown, they've wanted to maximize the potential for big matches between, in particular, the members of the Big Four. And I think that's a legitimate purpose, a legitimate objective, and I think they're entitled to make some money. I don't think, well, I'm not sure how much the executives are making, the top people are making in this business. I'm sure there's a lot of rich people, but I don't get the sense that tennis is the most lucrative of the sports. Certainly, it's not the most lucrative of the sports. That's definitely true. I mean, compared to like American basketball or football, I mean, tennis. Now, tennis does have the international appeal that football and basketball don't have, kind of in the same category as football, soccer, we call it here in the US, but the World Cup has a very international flavor as well. And in fact, it's kind of like every country but the US is really into the World Cup. So it's, in a way, it's international sans US. But listen, this draw, I think, looks to comport with the findings of draw fixing, insofar as Djokovic is in the same half as Federer. Once again, that's the finding for those of you tuning in. And for those of you tuning in as well, let me say hi. Thank you. Thanks for your viewership. But also, subscribe. Subscribe to the channel to get the live uncut streams. Totally uncut, totally rough, now totally uncensored. It's Triple X, baby. It's tennis porn here on Tennis Talk Daily. But remember to subscribe, and then once you have subscribed, click the bell next to subscribe. That way, when the live streams, the live uncut tennis commentary starts coming in over the course of the US Open, you will know. Instantaneously, you will know. Tennis Talk Daily's coming in uncut. Uncut live commentary. And we'll have matches actually going here on the monitor. I won't be able to show them to you because then we'll get copyright violations and we won't be able to do these cool live parties. But Liam Visser says, how you doing, Liam? Thanks for joining us. Federer will lose to Djokovic. Well, that's my prediction, but That'll be a good run. It'll be a quarterfinal run. It'll be as deep as he went last year. And we'll just have to see what happens. But I do think there is an outside possibility that, given the context, given the relatively smaller amount of pressure that's on Federer. I mean, compared to last year, the pressure is relaxed to a large degree, right? Remember, coming into the US Open last year, Federer was the Australian champion, the Wimbledon champion, the champion of the Sunshine Double. He did lose in the final of the Rogers Cup, of course, but that was kind of a back issue. Coming in the day before the US Open final last year, there was a lot of pressure, a lot of expectations surrounding Federer, no question about that. Now, he did not live up to those expectations at all. Amir Sanchez, Aaron, I will be very happy to see your predictions going wrong. Yeah, again. Well, I've been right before. I'm definitely not right all the time, but I have been right before. For example, I was saying yesterday, and I just to give you a counterpoint to that, Amir, when I saw the Stuttgart draw way back before the tournament started, really, I looked at that draw and I said, it's going to be Federer versus Raonic. And you can go back to my videos. I voiced that prediction very early in the tournament, and I was spot on about that. Now, in a couple of other occasions where I've been wrong, what I've done is not quite a prediction. It's a qualified prediction. So, for example, if you're talking about the time that a lot of people like to give me crap about, when I predicted Dominic Thiem would win in the final of the US Open, it was a prediction, but there were qualifications. There were requirements. I said if it was an if-then statement, as the logicians like to say. It was an if-then statement. I said, if Thiem does this, and I pointed to evidence from the tournament that he was capable of doing this. Had to do with return percentage, had to do with serving percentages, just the basic stats. I can't remember everything that I said. They were pretty ambitious requirements. I think I said that he's going to have to approach 50% or exceed 50% on his return percentage against Nadal. And I looked at the numbers from earlier in the week, and I looked at the numbers during the clay season, and I said, that's possible. So it wasn't a prediction so much as an outline of criteria that if Dominic Thiem could satisfy, and based on the evidence he was capable of satisfying, I thought he would be able to pull off an upset. And I admitted it, that it would be an upset. And so that was one that people gave me a hard time about. But I don't think I'm wrong. We'll see. Liam, nice to see you. Thanks for stopping in. But I don't think I am. We'll see. In a way, I kind of hope I'm wrong about the prediction. My rational scientific prediction for this US Open is Rafael Nadal in the final. And in fact, I mean, the rational scientific prediction, I think, is Nadal versus Djokovic in this final. The only question is whether Nadal can redeem against Djokovic after the close loss to Djokovic in the Queen's Club, in the Wimbledon semifinal. So that's my rational prediction. And I hope, Amir, that I'm wrong in a way. I would love to see surprises. That's why I love tennis. I would love to see some Cinderella run from somebody that we would have never expected. I really would love to see Tsitsipas come through Delpo, come through Medvedev, come through Coric, plow through Delpo somehow. He can do it. He's capable of beating Delpo. Would love to see Tsitsipas into the quarterfinal against potentially Raonic or Isner. Would love to see Tsitsipas charge through the quarterfinal, land a spot in the semifinal to face the great Rafael Nadal, the defending champion. I would love to see that. Nadal has not tolerated the young Greek. Nadal has not let Tsitsipas have his way in their matches together. It's been pretty one-sided to my mind. But listen, if Tsitsipas can do a run into the semifinals, that would be fantastic and inspiring, and once again suggestive that he is going to be, as I've predicted many times, a Grand Slam champion. And I think that again, more evidence if he were able to have that kind of a deep run. I'm not predicting that. I'm predicting, the scientific rational prediction is that he will fall, if not to Coric, then to Delpo. If not to Coric in the third round, we're talking about Tsitsipas's draw here. If not to Coric in the third round, then in the fourth round to Delpo. That's my scientific prediction. But if he pushes through Delpo and he pushes through, say, Isner, Raonic, maybe Wawrinka in the quarters, that would be great to see him in the semifinals, even if he ultimately fell to Nadal, which he likely would at that point. So I would love to see some surprises. I love to be proved wrong. Love that in tennis. Now, when I predict Roger Federer will win and then I'm proven wrong, that's not so enjoyable sometimes. But again, I mean, with Federer, I make assumptions. My assumptions with Federer, I mean, listen, much of his game depends on holding serve, obviously. And maybe it's not so obvious for some of you, but I think, the proposition is that a larger part of Federer's game rests on the serve than, say, for Djokovic or Nadal, obviously. That is obvious, but there's different variations on that theme when you start comparing Federer to other players. I mean, for example, I think I said yesterday that maybe Delpo and Federer have about the same reliance on their serve. Raonic probably relies on his serve even more than Federer, to be honest. Then you could take that to the extreme. Obviously, Isner is going to be much more serve-oriented than even Federer, but my predictions with respect to Roger Federer always assume that he will be serving well, and if he's not serving well, or if he's just not holding his line on serve, then all bets are off. And that's, when Djokovic broke Federer for the second time or whatever in the Cincy final last week, I think I tweeted, I said, okay, all bets are off. I mean, this thing's over. There's no way Federer can do this. Federer can't bear this. He can't bear this burden. And it was very, very clear. But at the same time, as I mentioned a couple of days ago, you can check my tweets. I actually stated, right as it was eminently clear that Federer would fall to Djokovic, I stated on Twitter, knowing that Federer would lose, I stated, I would be surprised if Federer didn't break Djokovic. And within 10 or 15 minutes after I tweeted that, Federer had broken Djokovic. Unfortunately for Federer, Djokovic, of course, broke right back. That was in the second set, which is what Djokovic does so well. That's why he wins. The break back. The break back. Fed wants revenge without question, Mo Faruqi. He wants revenge. He wants a piece of Djokovic. He wants to redeem. He's not scared of Novak Djokovic. These draws, for those of you who've been just tuning in, these draws at the Grand Slams for many years have been fixed to put Djokovic and Federer in the same half of the draw. That's what the research suggests. The number of times Djokovic and Federer have been in the same half of the draw, which pretty much all of the Grand Slams that this study that I talked about looked at, it was from 2008 to 2011. And the U.S. Open draw this year comports perfectly with the research. But the conclusion is Djokovic and Federer were in the same half of the draw in a way that did not comport with the proper way of randomly assigning these players, even in the top four. So something was tweaked. Something was tweaked there to, again, maximize the big four matchups. It's an interesting finding, folks. For those of you tuning in, I think the evidence is that there is tinkering with these draws. The draws are written out according to the fairly well-known procedure. There's a procedure for dealing with the top 4 seeds, a procedure for dealing with the seeded players, and then a more random procedure for dealing with the unseeded players. But they get tweaked once the procedure is followed. Once they get an initial draft of that draw, the special committee sits down and see you later, Amir. Thanks for joining us. I like your comments. See you later, Denai. Bye, Amir. They do tweak these draws. The select committee sits down and makes the modifications that will advance certain financial interests. And that's the truth. The good news is that they're not doing it in a very severe way. Obviously, it's not, you have to study the issue. It's not obvious and conspicuous. I mean, you had to have a scholar that kind of sat down and looked at the results and figured it all out. It's not at all evident to the naked eye just looking at these draws. It doesn't jump off the page. It's pretty subtle, the kind of tweaks they're doing. Well, I don't think it's objectionable. I think there's a bit of fixing, but it does kind of dovetail on this larger point, of fairness in tennis. I sometimes wonder whether there is possibly a day of reckoning coming in professional tennis. There has been a lot of talk about match fixing. There were the revelations recently, the report that proved irrefutably that match fixing was running rampant and is running rampant at the lower levels of the lower ranked players, say the second 100 players, ranked 100 and over. And Marco Cecchinato, who had that tremendous Cinderella run at the French Open, of course, had been embroiled in controversy. He had been one of those players playing down in the low ranks, the low tiers, Those were the scrappy matches, the challengers, the 250s. That's where it's occurring. It's corrupt down there. And the bettors are driving it. The bettors are driving it. All the betting that's occurring, that holds the potential to corrupt professional tennis without question. But then there's the other issue of, and I think there may be a day of reckoning coming. Thank you, Interi. Thanks for your comments. By the way, I was going to talk about a couple of your comments. I saw that you disagreed with my characterization of Rafa Nadal as a bull. You like Nadal as the lion, huh? Yeah, he's bigger than a bull, is what Interi said. He's bigger than a bull. He's a lion. I can understand that. No, I see you. I see that point. I guess my counterpoint would be there's been so many times when people have compared Nadal to the bull. I mean, in other words, it's always he's been traditionally, I think, traditionally compared to a bull in terms of the animals. We were talking about tennis players as animals yesterday, and I said that Nadal's the bull, Federer's the cat, and of Djokovic, and this was a bit controversial, but Interi actually agreed with me that Djokovic is the hyena. And I just think that's perfect. I don't think anyone has come up with that animal analogy for Djokovic. Go look up hyena. Look up the description of hyenas. Hyenas, by the way, are very dangerous and mean animals, and they chase away massive predators like lions. They've been known to repel and chase away massive predators. Well, Djokovic is the hyena. Djokovic is Nadal's the bull. Federer's the cat. Federer has the kind of cat family, the feline family, because that's the way he looks out there when he gets moving. He's like a cat. There's no question about it. It's unmistakable. But in any case, getting back to this potential day of reckoning, there could be a day of reckoning, because then there's match fixing, there's draw fixing, and the match fixing again is driven by all the bettors. Yeah, I know, hyenas. They're awesome. I mean, it's a compliment to call Djokovic a hyena. It's a big compliment, but it really is kind of perfect. Fed is the Royal Bengal tiger. Yes, I like that, Mo. I won't object to that, so long as he's in the cat family, because he is cat-like, isn't he? He's just a cat, and then it comes back down to that footwork. I mean, in a way, you could say that the problem was in the match with Djokovic in Cincinnati that, Federer couldn't bring out the cat. Federer, the cat, was not on the court because the footwork is very essential to the whole cat-like persona that Federer takes on in the court, right? Of course, he's got the running forehands. That's a shot that Tsitsipas actually needed to work on. So maybe in the end, Nick Kyrgios had a point. He had a small point that you can't really object to, and it wasn't that controversial, which was that Tsitsipas needs to work on his game still. And of course he does, but I still think Nick Kyrgios should have buttoned his lip before he stated that Tsitsipas is not a good player, which is what he stated. But I was sent the whole quote and reminded also that earlier in the quote, he said that Tsitsipas was a good player. But the upshot of what he was trying to say is Tsitsipas is a bad player, but he will be good. But I just thought he should have shut up on the first piece of it because he's never played Tsitsipas before. But back to this day of reckoning. Day of reckoning. Is there a day of reckoning coming in tennis? Possibly. Possibly. The draws are getting fixed. The matches are getting fixed to some degree. And I believe there are players that are taking performance-enhancing drugs. I believe that. The tennis authorities have never been very strict with respect to enforcing the banned substances rules. They have never been very strict. And basically all you need to do is oppose those kind of accusations. And eventually, particularly if it's a first time, you're going to get let off. So for example, there was a time Richard Gasquet had cocaine in his body. He was tested for cocaine. And he made this excuse that he was kissing some woman who had the cocaine kiss, the famous the Gasquet cocaine kiss. Well, that's not a very persuasive response, if you ask me. Not persuasive at all. And yet, Gasquet, still in the game, etc. Well, I think the tennis players tend most toward the speedy amphetamine type of drug. So cocaine actually makes sense. Cilic had some problems, I believe. Cilic had an accusation. There are some players who are doing it. I do not believe that the top players are doing it because the top players are subjected to a lot more testing than the lower ranked players. So the Djokovic's, the Federers, the Nadals, they really can't get away with it because they're tested so many times. Well, let me take that back. They could get away with it. And you have to know about the performance-enhancing drugs and how they operate in order to understand how they could get away with it. But there's ways to basically just take a very small amount that would never show up in a test. So, and that's for some of the most popular performance-enhancing drugs. Maybe one day there will be a day of reckoning. But I hope there isn't. But you do have this phenomenon, and I got a lot of blowback when I mentioned this a few months ago. The phenomenon of the older players doing so well in tennis, and one possible explanation being that they could be ingesting substances. I just don't know. I mean, when Federer played Anderson, and Anderson then he had the match with Isner, and Anderson was just doing these marathon matches. I mean, my first question was, how is he getting the juice to do this? How is he getting the juice to do this? Well, I'm not sure, folks. Potential day of reckoning in tennis. Let's look at some comments. Oh, yes, I remember. Fun fact from Denai Corey. Tsitsipas said that they're in the works for an event in Greece. Bagdatis, Kyrgios, Kokkinakis, and him. I don't think Kyrgios and Tsitsipas vibe, but I don't think there is a bad blood either. Yeah, I think that's right. Maybe there isn't. I don't know. I mean, my assumption is that Kyrgios and Zverev, because remember, Alexander Zverev also made subtly derogatory comments about Tsitsipas after, in fact, losing to Tsitsipas in Canada. And that was, Zverev was sort of sore about that because he's a defending champion in Canada. But I don't think it's bad blood necessarily, but I think they have some issues with Tsitsipas. This goes back to another theme that I've emphasized a couple of times, which is that not many of these players are very chummy anyway. There's some interesting vibes. There's some passive aggressiveness, passive aggression, or passive aggressiveness, if you want to put it that way. It's there, and it exists between virtually all the players. I mean, very few of the players are actually real chummy. They don't trust each other. No, sir. You can't trust Djokovic. He's a hyena. So the draw, guys, it looks like it's going to be some great opening matches again. Wawrinka versus Dimitrov will be tomorrow. We can review a couple more of these matches. I was doing it before. We'll be covering it all. Remember, if you're just tuning in, to subscribe to the channel and click the bell next to the subscribe button, because that's a very important part of it. That will enable you to get notifications. You don't like the hyena, Mo? No, I thought it was a pretty appropriate way to describe Djokovic, but Federer's the cat, Djokovic hyena, Nadal the bull. But I have people that believe that Nadal should be possibly a lion. But in the email, or excuse me, the message from Interi, who's a subscriber and one of our frequent commentators, who's very smart and knows a lot about tennis and has played tennis. You can tell he's played tennis, which is important too. But he said that, he loves Federer, but again, it's, I think, disappointing how often Federer has been cracking under the pressure and just not delivering when he has to. Not delivering when he has to. Federer could be a lizard. Well, a lizard sort of works too, but lizards aren't sort of agile and quick like cats. It depends on the lizard. Maybe some of the smaller lizards are, but I like Federer in the feline family. I really like Federer in the feline family. So what else do we have here to talk about that we were talking about the Lendl Zverev partnership, and it looks like that's going to be fruitful. I hope it's fruitful. Listen, Alexander Zverev is really the great hope. He's the verifiable hope. Now, Tsitsipas is becoming a verifiable hope. Tsitsipas is getting close. Listen, after that Rogers Cup run, folks, I hope some of you who were doubters before were convinced by his run, which included victories over no less than four top 10 players, before, of course, falling to Nadal pretty decisively. But I knew then that he would be, I knew then that, well, I knew before. I predicted that Tsitsipas was going to be the number one player in the world months ago. So, and I stick to that prediction. I will not back off of that prediction. But the question is, does Zverev hold more sort of verifiable promise? Does Zverev hold verifiable promise? And the answer has to be yes, because he's got the titles under his belt. And really, he's on the upward trajectory, folks. I mean, notwithstanding a few upsets here and there, notwithstanding the loss to Tsitsipas, notwithstanding a couple of uneven results. Of course, he was pushed to 5 sets at the French in those 3 consecutive matches. Notwithstanding that, of course, he did push through those matches, but he's delivering better results. He had his best result at the Grand Slam. He's racked up now a few Masters 1000 events. In the final at Miami, he performed well on clay. He is a true hope, a true promise, a verifiable star in the making, to a greater extent than Tsitsipas, because Tsitsipas doesn't have the titles, does he? He doesn't have any titles. I think he's got 0 titles. Has Tsitsipas won a tournament? I'd probably want to verify that. He's probably won some challengers or whatever. Yes, Zverev more steady than Tsitsipas, but I would say, now you're right. See, that's the one thing that distinguishes them. And that's the one factor, the fact that Tsitsipas is an all-surface player, an all-court player. When we use the phrase all-court, it can actually refer to 2 things. One is playing the whole court, all-court game. But then there's also the sense in which, we use it to refer to an ability to excel on all the surfaces. And Tsitsipas, so far this year, and we don't have as much evidence with Tsitsipas as we have with Zverev, but so far this year, he has really demonstrated that he can excel on all the surfaces in a way that Zverev can't quite do. I think Zverev essentially struggles on the turf, right? He's not a real good grass performer. But yes, I've watched some of the I know of some of the other tennis commentators, of course, Matt, and then there's a few others I know. And I love the fact that there are a number of commentators. I love the fact that, there's this cool community on YouTube that's doing this. Of course, Matt over at Coffee Break Tennis was one of my first exposures. He started his channel before mine, and I have a soft spot in my heart for Matt because I like what he's doing over there. I like Matt. Of course, he's a real likable guy. That's part of his appeal. But he knows his tennis too. Federer, Sparata. Well, thank you, Mo. On behalf of Aaron, anyway. I can't speak on behalf of Matt, but you know what? I could probably speak on behalf of Matt here. On Matt's behalf, thank you. On my behalf, thank you. I like you too. But I love the YouTube community on YouTube. It's fantastic. Can you do a round-by-round prediction? Well, soft prediction. I've been through this draw from every single angle. And let me say, for those of you tuning in, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And remember, when you subscribe, to hit that bell button, because that will give you the notifications of the uncut live streams coming in from Tennis Talk Daily throughout the U.S. Open. We are going to be picking this tournament apart in every possible way. We are going to be revising predictions all the way along because you have to. You have to be sensitive to what's going on. We have to get a sense of how these players are playing on the courts. We have to kind of Aaron, yes, Matt is great. I actually have contact with him in Instagram. He loves Federer exactly like you and me. Oh, yes, he does. He's a true lover of Roger, and he's still kind of fighting the fight. I think he's been suggesting, again, we're talking about Matt over at Coffee Break Tennis, a lovely guy with a fantastic personality, a likable personality. And I think he's kind of hanging in there for Federer. I think he's came out with a video or a statement that he thought the draw was not as bad for Federer as many people had suggested. I'm assuming that was based on a conclusion on the part of Matt that Kyrgios doesn't present that much of a threat on the hard courts at the U.S. Open because Kyrgios, again, doesn't have a particularly solid record. But if I were to play the devil's advocate, I would say that Kyrgios certainly has demonstrated an ability to get under Federer's skin. And those are close matches. Here again, see, Roger, he can't get a piece of Nick's serve. He can't break Nick. And that, again, has to do with the ground game to a large degree, but Federer does need work on that return game. And you could argue that there's too much reliance placed on the serve for Federer. And he's exposing himself now. Given the recent experience, given the recent matches, Federer's beginning to expose himself to the accusation that he's just a server. He's just a server. He's having trouble mustering the ground game, mustering the total package. He's serving well, although not so well against Djokovic. But generally, he's been serving well. He did that all the way through the grass season. But it's not enough. It's not enough. And if nothing else, folks like Djokovic and Nadal, their success is proof positive of the necessity for a very strong return game in this day and age in professional tennis. Federer needs to work on his return game. Doesn't it kind of boil down to that? It kind of boils down to that. He needs to work. He needs to kind of retool. He needs to bring out something new. I had a comment the other day that I keep going back to because I thought it was an interesting kind of thought experiment, which is the comment was Federer should retire. Federer should retire and then come back in a couple of years, make a comeback after retiring. There'll be no expectations, and he might be able to kind of refresh and retool his game. He's capable of reinventing. Federer is capable of reinventing. But the evidence from the last couple of weeks is that he's not reinventing. He's kind of reclining back into his serve, relying too heavily on the serve and not attacking as much on the return game and not really paying enough attention to strategy and whatnot with respect to the return game. He needs to improve the return game, or at least raise the return game to the level that it has been in the past. Let's take a comment here. Terry. Aaron, do you believe that Nadal will catch Federer's Grand Slam record? Oh, man. I think the answer has to be yes. I mean, listen, let's put it this way. If Nadal were to defend his title at the U.S. Open this year, then I think the answer would be without question, incontrovertibly, without a traceable vestige of uncertainty, yes, that Nadal will catch him. But the one wrinkle there, Terry, the one wrinkle, and it's a great question. I've received it a couple of times. I've had to kind of deal with this question, but The one wrinkle is, for purposes of like larger GOAT arguments, is that if Rafa doesn't kind of distribute some more surfaces into his Grand Slam tally, then he is exposed to the idea that he is primarily a clay man, primarily a clay specialist. And so that if he catches Roger on clay alone, in other words, catches Roger by virtue of wins at Roland Garros alone. So in other words, he wins 3 or 4 more French Opens, which is totally possible. In fact, I'm not sure it's likely. I think he's probably got a good 50% chance of doing that. So I guess that's my answer. I think on balance, the answer is Nadal will likely catch Federer. Now that assumes that Federer doesn't move anywhere with respect to his Grand Slam tally. I think some people are starting to come to grips with the notion that it's probably going to sit at 20. And 20 is a very nice number. 20 is just perfect. It's a beautiful number. Even if Nadal catches Federer with respect to the Grand Slam total, there could be a problem if Rafa's additional Grand Slam titles going forward are at Roland Garros alone. In other words, he cannot lift any more trophies at the Australian, at the US, or at Wimbledon. I think that would be one factor we'd have to take into account, because Roger is pretty, save for, there's the one sensitive spot. He's only got the one French title, but he did make it to the final of Roland Garros 5 times, which is only a couple of other people in the history of tennis who have done. Otherwise, however, save for that, I think it's something that you got to deal with in Roger's record. The fact that there's only one title at the French, it's a big deal. Or it's one factor, but it's not as sort of conspicuous and problematic as Nadal's tally would be if he just wins more Frenches. If it's just French after French after French after French. That will create problems for Nadal. He's the king of clay already. There's no question about that. He's the GOAT on clay. He's the clay GOAT. So whether he wins more French Opens, I mean, it really doesn't matter. For purposes of him being the clay GOAT, it's already done. But I would say if Rafa can include another title on hard courts, and gosh, for purposes of Rafa's legacy and Rafa, what would be preferable and best for Rafa in terms of the GOAT debate would be, I think, one more Grand Slam on hards, at least one more Grand Slam on hard courts, whether it be Australian or the US Open. I think it would probably be better at the Australian, because I think he has only one Australian Open. So he needs to get some Australians. I think he's got 3 US Opens. If he can do that, if he can get more Grand Slam titles on hard court, preferably at the Australian, and then if he could get one more Wimbledon title, and then you pack in a few more French Open titles. If you can do all that, well, we're going to have a GOAT. We're going to have a GOAT debate. We're going to have a GOAT debate. For now, the GOAT debate is kind of on hold. At this point, at this particular moment in time, it's Roger Federer. And that's just what the numbers say. We could argue about that. There are a lot of people, I think, that have legitimate arguments that Nadal is already the GOAT based on his record. He's not a clay specialist. That's the truth of the matter. And he's won a substantial number of tournaments on the hard courts, obviously. And he's also has the Wimbledon titles, the 2 Wimbledon titles. Or is it 3 Wimbledon titles? I'm not sure. Maybe it's 2, yes. So another Wimbledon title would be best for Rafa Nadal. It would be best for his legacy. We'll see what happens. Sparata, 91 says, I wonder what years Federer will look back and think, yeah, should have closed the deal in those Grand Slam matches. 2009 and 2011 come to mind. Yeah, those were tough years for him, without question. He'll probably look back at the 2018 Wimbledon tournament and think that as well, in a way. But there were a lot of matches in there as well. There's been close calls. I got another message from a viewer mentioning there's so many close calls with him, and he's just missed. It's kind of the near misses. And there's been a lot of them. There's actually nothing too unusual about Federer's recent form. If you know his history, he's pulled this kind of crap before. It happens. It happens when you play tennis for a living and all you do is play tennis. I mean, every day can't be a great day on the court. But I do think that in this particular tournament, Federer has his work cut out for him in the U.S. Open. He will have some serious competition, if not in Kyrgios, and if not, probably might see Fognini or Chung. We'll have to see what Chung and Fognini are looking like in a possible round of 16 match for Federer. But of course, Djokovic is going to be the one that poses the biggest problem for him. Stephen Martin says, can't see Murray getting another Grand Slam and none of the next gen. 7 more for Rafa, 12 for Novak. You think Novak's going to win 12 more Grand Slams? You must be a Novak Djokovic fan. I wouldn't put it past him. Judging from history, it's possible that Novak could do that in a very short time. He could do that in 3 years. Imagine that scenario. And the Federer fans among you are going to shudder and cringe. But imagine that scenario. Djokovic just starts cleaning up at the Grand Slams, just consecutive for the next 3 years. Passes Federer's record, gets the calendar slams. Can you imagine? Well, at the end of that, we would be looking at a different sort of landscape of tennis players, particularly with regard to the GOAT debate. There's going to be a lot of great matches here. Great to have you, Denai. Thanks so much for your comments. I am going to be wrapping it up. We've been on now for a couple of hours. It's been another great live discussion. I'm going to be back tomorrow. And what can I say, folks? It's going to be a fantastic tournament. It really has all the makings of history. We're watching history take place, and I'm looking forward very much to sharing it with you guys. Whatever happens, for the Fed fans, remember, just as Fed needs to relax, so too do the Fed fans. Relax and enjoy. Enjoy Federer's play. He's still around. He's still displaying the brilliance that we know and love. It's a little less consistent. He's having some weird days. He's a person. He's human. But have confidence. He could pull some surprises without question. But I'm sticking to my prediction at this point that Rafael Nadal is a favorite, not an overwhelming favorite, but he is the favorite to defend his title at the U.S. Open. Novak Djokovic is close in line there, I think close behind Nadal. And if we see a Nadal versus Djokovic final, which looks to be how it will happen, then it's very possible that Djokovic could come out the victor there. Of course, the recent history between Djokovic and Nadal is the Wimbledon semifinal. So Nadal has, I think, a bit more fire to redeem. But Djokovic knows how to take care of Rafa. That's for sure. And holds a winning record against Nadal, holds a winning record against Federer. I was looking at the stats the other day, of course, and all the numbers suggest that Djokovic has had a tougher slog through his Grand Slam titles than any of the other big four players, and in particular Roger Federer and Rafael Nadal. So he has that ability. It's an ugly process for Djokovic, you know. It's ugly. He's been, and part of it's because he's had hard slogs, very hard slogs. And again, the numbers show that they're actually, at least from 2008 forward, 2008 to 2009, because before that, Federer was kind of in a league of his own. It was a different era. The critics, of course, say that it was a weak era, which is false. We can have that discussion some other time. Thank you very much, Inter and Terry. He says, Aaron, I love these live shows. Every time I am not at work, I always see these shows. You know a lot of tennis, my friend. Well, thank you. And you do too. I appreciate your comments. I can tell not only that you know tennis, but that you've played tennis. You know, you have the view from the ground. Some of the commentators, get the view from 30,000 feet, but I can tell, Inter and Terry, you have a view from the ground. I really appreciate your comments. You said some provocative stuff, in fact. It's the truth, provocative truth. That's my favorite kind of truth, provocative truth. Truth that shocks. People need to be shocked with the truth, don't they? Well, folks, it's been so wonderful to have this discussion with you, but all good things must come to an end. I hope everyone is doing wonderfully. And again, I look forward to following. We're going to be picking this thing apart, this tournament, from every possible angle. I am going to be attending to this tournament as closely as I can so that I can offer as much insight and information for you during the course of this tournament. It's the last Grand Slam of the year. Subscribe to the channel and remember to hit the bell button as well after you subscribe so you get the notifications of the uncut Tennis Talk Daily live streams. Absolutely live, 100% live and uncut, mistakes and all, blemishes and all. We don't care about we just want to get to the truth and get to the heart of what's happening in this tournament. We don't care about mistakes. We don't care about strange things that happen if I have to go adjust the blinds or whatever. No, we're into understanding this tournament, and that's what we're going to do this week. That's what I want to offer to you. And thanks so much for your viewership one more time. Look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Signing off from Boston. Bye, guys. Thanks.